Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. Today's video is in reference to a conversation I was having with a friend of mine in reference to a project that he's working on. And in this conversation, he said something to the effect of, well, if it pulls more than 20 amps, it'll just trip the breaker. And I said, well, maybe. And that led to more conversation about circuit breakers. So I figured I'd throw together this video to give you a quick idea of my knowledge of circuit breakers and how they work, and to show you a cutaway view of a circuit breaker in action. So stay tuned. So I've collected some circuit breakers over the years, and I'm sure if you're watching this, you probably have a good idea what a circuit breaker looks like. But just in case you don't, I have a few from different manufacturers. This one's a Siemens. This is where it connects to the bus bar. This is where you connect it to the branch circuit. This is the on-off button, pretty self-explanatory. This is a square D model. It's very similar, almost identical. This is a slimline version made by GE. This is a much larger, more expensive arc fault circuit breaker. It's got the distinctive white pigtail and the test button. They're also making these in GFCI versions. Now, most of you will probably not recognize this breaker. Some of you might. But as you can see, it's got a very distinctive color and shape to it. It also has a very distinctive attachment point where it attaches to the bus bar. This is a replacement breaker for a Federal Pacific electrical panel. Now, Federal Pacific manufactured electrical panels from around 1950 through the late 80s. And unfortunately for a lot of homeowners and Federal Pacific, their breakers, especially their stab lock breakers, would fail to disconnect the circuit in an overload situation. So what would happen is the circuit would just get so hot, it would catch the structure on fire. That caused Federal Pacific to go out of business. As such, most insurance companies will not insure a property with Federal Pacific electrical panels in them. Now, there are plenty of other electrical panels that have similar problems, and if you want more information on that and other construction red flags to look out for, I went to a good bit of trouble to put together a book about getting into the rental property business that has a 200-page section with over 250 photos, color photos, of things to look out for. That way, when you're looking at properties out there, you don't end up buying a money pit, you know, that destroys your returns or kills the deal altogether. But this breaker will cost you about 60 American dollars compared to this breaker, which will cost you about $7. So, as you can see, if you had to change out an entire panel of breakers like this, it's probably going to be more cost beneficial just to change out the entire panel to newer, safer breakers anyway. So, anyway, enough about Federal Pacific breakers. So, in this video, I took this square D breaker, right, similar to the other one, and I basically drilled out the rivets so I could show you the inner workings of the breaker. Now, I'm going to attempt to short circuit this breaker and film it in slow motion so you're able to see what exactly happens during a short circuit. And I'm also going to attempt to overload it so you can see how the bimetallic strip right here works to break the circuit in an overload situation. So stay tuned. This is where the breaker connects to the line side of the system, and just to the left of it is where it'll disconnect the circuit. This is the latch point, and this is the magnetic armature that will move away from the latch point, allowing it to disconnect the circuit. And here it is one more time. So this is where we try to overload the circuit.
And this is the bimetallic strip, which runs almost all the way to the end of the armature. Watch for this strip to bend away to the left of the screen, unlatching it so it can disconnect the circuit. So while you're watching this, most residential breakers that I'm aware of come with what's called a time current curve or a trip curve, which is a graph explaining when the breaker will trip and under what circumstances. And I'll go over that next. So this is my representation of a time current graph. It's hand drawn. It's obviously not to scale. The numbers on the bottom represent, along the x-axis, represent multiples of circuit breaker continuous current rating. So if the circuit breaker is rated for 20 amps and you see down at the bottom 10, that means 200 amps. And along the y-axis is time in seconds. And those numbers at the top, that top number at 10,000 seconds is not something I made up. That's legit. Under low current draws, it can take that long for the breaker, those bimetallic strips, to heat up enough to actually disconnect the circuit. And 10,000 seconds is a good long movie, so it's quite a while. On the lower end of the y-axis, where you see the 0.001, that area is almost considered the instantaneous trip of the breaker. So that's when you get in multiples of 20, 30, 40 times the amp rating of the circuit breaker. So when the circuit breaker sees that huge amount of amperage, it almost instantaneously, via the magnet, disconnects the circuit. So if you notice, the graph has two dark green lines that almost mirror each other with a light green shaded area in between. And what that means is that at any point on the graph where the conditions are met, the circuit breaker could take that amount of time to actually trip. So if we're looking here around the 20-second mark and 7 times the amperage, it could take, according to this graph, which is not accurate, of course, it could take anywhere from 20 to 200 seconds to trip. Now, that's just to give you an idea of how these graphs are set up. Again, I made this graph real quick just to show you guys. So the numbers in the graph are by no means to scale. So keep that in mind.
I want to thank you guys for taking the time to check out this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and hopefully it gave you a little bit better insight into how circuit breakers work. If you're interested in this sort of content, or you might be thinking about getting into the rental property business, consider checking out my book where I share my 15 years of experience owning and operating rental properties. I'll put a link in the description below when it's available. Thank you again for watching, and have a great day.